Hello, my name is Eben Rose. I'm running for Maine State Senate in District 29 as a clean elections candidate, and I've been making a series of vlogs in my basement while I make signs for this campaign as a way to sort of discuss some of the weighty issues that this pandemic has brought to our doorstep. In the past several vlogs, I've been talking about the economy and about what it means for us, and emphasizing the point that the economy works for people. It works for us. It is a creation by humans that is crafted by humans to serve certain ends. And I think an important part of the lessons that we learn out of this crisis that is the pandemic and the economic shocks that attend to it is that we change some of our language, and in particular with economics, not see economics as this thing that sort of falls from the sky fully formed and is immutable. It is a creation of humans, and we can craft and shape economics in ways that serve certain ends. So I'm going to start by talking about some good news, and that is that the City of Amsterdam in the Netherlands has adopted an economic model as a response to this crisis that they will use in their economic planning from this point forward. And it is called the Doughnut Economics. And it's an idea that was promoted by an Oxford economist named Kate Raworth. So I'm going to explain a little bit about Doughnut Economics and tell you why it's important and how in the state of Maine we need to adopt a model very much like this for our own economic planning. So first, one thing about me is I'm an earth scientist by training. I did a dissertation topic on the origins of life on Earth. And part of this sort of overlapped with the weird allied field called astrobiology. And astrobiology is the search for life on other planets. I'm going on this little bit of a tangent just because one part of the astrobiology investigation is about finding other planets and habitable zones in which those planets orbit their host stars. So the habitable zone, the Goldilocks zone, is some area in which a planet is not too close to the star that it becomes irradiated and water is not stable, etc., but yet not too far away that it becomes likewise uninhabitable because it is too cold and the ice will freeze. So the idea of a habitable zone is similar to this idea of Doughnut Economics. Doughnut Economics is a zone in which an economy can be sustained in the ecology of the Earth. If there's any lesson to be learned out of this pandemic, it is that we need to be ready for climate change, which will bring a series of disasters, of crises, including other pandemics. So this is our chance to practice. One of the lessons that we have to learn coming out of this pandemic is that our economy in the United States and in the developed world is not sustainable in the ecosystem as we know it. It is massively consumptive of Earth's resources. And as we use this pandemic as an important proving ground for our abilities and capabilities to deal with the multiple crises that will come with climate change, then we need to understand that growth, economic growth, is not the goal of economics. It should not be the goal of economics because it is not sustainable. You cannot have endless growth in a limited ecosystem. One of my earlier vlogs emphasized fundamental human needs as a basis, a starting place, a core tenet of what economies should be and what purpose economics serves. And that is that economics serves the purpose of human development, not growth, but human development. So if we want to call human development, if we want to cast that in terms of growth, we can, but everywhere our language and our metrics on growth have to change. So this is one of the bases of the Doughnut Economics by Kate Raworth. This idea of a habitable zone of economics doesn't focus on growth. It focuses on human development. So the inner part of the circle is what we are trying to achieve through our economic efforts, through how we craft economies. So it is the social foundation. From the center, there's a lack of fulfillment of some of these fundamental human needs. But as economies are shaped to grow in certain areas, it should be distributive so that no one is feeling any deficit in one of these fundamental human needs. Then you get into the habitable zone where markets can thrive and where people are not deprived of their fundamental human needs in order to sustain those markets, and where commerce doesn't exploit people and exploit the environment. Economics as a term appears many times in state legislation. The whole Department of Economic and Community Development is statutory. It was established by the legislature and serves the purpose of reporting on the economic health and vitality of the state and publishing recommendations or studies that have recommendations for areas that the state should grow, should focus its attention on to bring forth, economic prosperity. In 2008, the Economic and Community Development Department published a report, a study called Main Technology Sectors and Clusters, Status and Strategy. And this is, I think, very typical of these kinds of economic reports in deploying terms, what I consider very vacuous terms like prosperity and growth, or even economic for that matter, without really grounding it, making that extra step and grounding it into how it is that jobs or job growth does anything really important for the individual that is truly fulfilling of its fundamental human needs, that is truly fulfilling of ikigai for that person. Remember, ikigai is something that I spoke to in an earlier vlog. Does this job, for example, bring fulfillment to the individual doing it? Is it something that that person feels passionate about and can be good at? And most importantly, is it something that the world needs? So the world needing a bunch of plastic junk that may be a good job for somebody because it pays that person money and allows that person to pay the bills doesn't help the world. This is the ecologic ceiling that Raworth's Doughnut Economics refers to. So I would like to, as state senator, do like the City of Amsterdam has done last week, and that's adopt fully the model of Doughnut Economics and recast all of this economic work that the state of Maine is trained towards and devote it towards this ecological limitation that is the limits of growth. So this is where it becomes extra important in terms of climate change. All right, so I'm going to put this in real practical terms. That report from 2008 made all these recommendations, a very glossy report, made all these recommendations for areas to concentrate on and, this sector and that sector. And, the ultimate goal is that we're going to be better off, right? It's long-term planning. Well, that was 12 years ago. And regardless of whatever happened between then and now, we have this pandemic, a virus that changed everything. This is a naturally occurring phenomenon, not different from any number of naturally occurring crises that will be how climate change will impact us. So how resilient are we? How resilient are we that we have in this nation 22 million jobless claims? The numbers aren't out for what Maine is going to be like in terms of the economic impacts, but we know it's going to be proportionally quite severe. So all of that planning, all that glossy report and all these experts coming from Harvard Business School and experts within the state, looking at their crystal ball and deciding this and planning that, it's all meaningless, absolutely meaningless. Why? Because they were focused on this vacuous BS that is growth in certain sectors, trying to project this idea of economic growth that is based on consumption and more consumption and more consumption that has a deleterious effect on the environment. And it did not count that at all. It did not count it in a serious way or countenance that in any serious way. I mean, really serious way. Like down in the nuts and bolts, when you extract something from natural resources, what is that impact in the long term? Not, oh, well, we have to dig up our prosperity from the earth because there's no other way. There has to be another way. That's the only way that we can survive this economic calamity. The only way we can survive and have a sustainable economy on this earth. So a sustainable economy does not mean sustained 3% growth or 2% growth. It means sustained in terms of human fundamental needs that are truly sustainable in the ecologic sense. That's what that has to be. At a very technical level, the kinds of industries that need to be encouraged and promoted in the state are circular technologies or circular industries. And by circular, I'm not necessarily referring to donuts. I'm referring to waste stream and not producing things from raw materials that end up just in a landfill as their ultimate goal, but that the ultimate fate of these materials, be they plastics or certain kinds of refined products, that the whole architecture of the manufacturing and supply stream should consider what the long-term life and death of these materials are. It's been referred to as cradle-to-cradle technologies. So this is the kind of sustainable economics, the kind of sustainable industry that absolutely has to be the focus of any industry facet of, or manufacturing industry facet of growth. Meanwhile, right now there's a Governor's Climate Council that has been appointed to solve the problem of how to deal with climate change. And without getting into how their governing structure is and how they operate and what's going to happen with their recommendations, etc., I do want to point out this very interesting report by Richard Silkman, who is an economist, policy guy. I think he taught at University of Southern Maine for a while. Anyway, this report, I have to just say a couple comments about it. This is a nice glossy report. It's 100 pages nearly, and it's not unlike the other reports that the state commissions, but this wasn't commissioned by the state. As I understand, this was produced gratis by Dr. Silkman. So thank you for producing this. I mean, it was really an act of munificence on his behalf. So our report, it's called The New Energy Policy Direction for Maine, A Pathway to Zero Carbon Economy by 2050. All right, it's a good report. I like the structure. It says that we can achieve our zero carbon goals by 2050. It will take a huge amount of investment and a huge amount of work, and we have a chance of getting there. So it doesn't paint a particularly rosy picture, but it is a pathway. All right, so thank you for that. Well, one thing I want to point out in this is this. This is a figure. There's a figure 1-1. So on this graph, you can see that there's a vertical axis and a horizontal axis. The horizontal axis is time, going from 1963 to 2015. Vertical axis is real GDP per millions of British thermal units. So that's a measure of how much energy is used. How much energy is used in order to support GDP growth. That's gross domestic product. So the implication here is that in order to sustain this kind of economic growth as measured by GDP, we will necessarily have to consume a certain amount of energy. And it's pretty well known that the more growth you have, the more energy you will consume. So this has generated what's been called the energy gap, our predicted or hoped for growth in terms of GDP throughout the world and the state of Maine tracks with our energy use. So the prediction is that we will, of course, use much more energy. And then the challenge is, well, how do we get this kind of, how do we maintain this kind of growth or achieve this kind of growth with the kinds of energy sources that we need that are not fossil fuel based? But as it turns out, the biggest energy savings or the biggest inroad we have into reducing our carbon footprint is not by filling the energy gap with, say, nuclear technology or the like. It's by consuming less energy, actually consuming less energy. Now, is that possible? Well, according to the energy gap theory or hypothesis, well, we can't do that because growth is necessary for prosperity. And in order for us to prosper, we need to use all this energy. And that turns out to be actually not true at all. In fact, it can't be true because we can't keep consuming our way into prosperity, or we will run into the ecologic limits. That is the upper limit or the ceiling of the Kate Raworth Doughnut Economics. So this pandemic is at least teaching us that we can have some prosperity without driving all the time. And so we need to create an economy that takes all the good things that we are experiencing, all the good lessons we are experiencing from this pandemic. And I'm not saying this pandemic is a good thing, but there are important lessons that it is teaching us about our energy use and about what we need in order to live happy lives, and what we don't need and what is not necessary in order to live happy lives. So that is the fundamental transformation we need to make in how we talk about economics and how we talk about economic development. That language has to be infused in all of the state apparatuses that deal with this issue, including the contemporary issue of recommendations for how we achieve carbon net zero emissions by 2050. So, key takeaway points. Once again, have to emphasize, economics is about humans. Economic development is about human development. That's one point. Economies, second point, economies work for us. They are creations by humans to help us achieve our maximum human potential. We do not work for the economy. It is not this abstract thing that is hovering over our heads, trickling down goodness onto us. All that language that is in our policies about economics that speaks in these terms about vacuous things like prosperity and jobs without articulating how it is meaningful for the people on the ground and how is it sustainable in our ecology is just vacuous, trickle down garbage. And we need to own this term. So that's the third take home point, I guess, is that we need to own this realm of economics and put it in real human terms through the filter of true ecologic sustainability, and not relegate this to some high priesthood of economics that will come down every 10 or 12 years with some glossy report telling us that we need to invest in this area, because you know what? None of that matters. None of that came true, and none of it is grounded in the hard realities of a limited ecosystem. So those are the key take-home points. Once again, my name is Eben Rose. I'm running for state senate. I thank you for watching this blog, and I encourage you, if you can, to go to my website at ebenrose.com. If you can, make a $5 contribution to my Clean Elections site, and come July, since the primary date has been delayed, I look forward to your support and vote. So thank you very much. Be safe, be well, and have a good week.